The first time I saw blood on my mother's face, I did not feel fear. I felt heat in my hands and a loud ringing in my ears. I had never hit anyone in my life. But in that moment, something changed inside me. My name is Rosa. I was 15 when it happened. I lived with my mother in a small room behind the textile factory where she worked every night. Our room had one window, 2 chairs, and an old fan that made noise but did not move any air. We shared a single bed, and when the rain came through the cracks in the roof, we placed bowls on the floor and waited for it to stop. We did not have much, but we had a routine. I went to school during the day, and my mother worked in the evenings. After school, I would heat rice or bread and wait for her to come home. We ate together and sometimes listened to the radio if the electricity was working. That was our life. Simple, quiet, and safe. Or at least, that is what I thought. That evening started like many others. I was doing my homework when I heard loud voices from the back of the building. At first, I ignored them. There were always arguments near the factory, drivers shouting, machines breaking, or someone late for their shift. But then I heard something that made me stand up. I heard my mother's voice. She was not shouting, but I could tell she was upset. There was fear in her tone. I ran to the door and looked out. It was already dark, but I could see 2 people near the laundry room. One was my mother. The other was a woman in a black coat, standing too close, speaking too fast. I left the room and walked quickly toward them. I could not hear everything, but I saw my mother take a step back. Then the woman raised her hand. That was when I ran. By the time I reached them, my mother was leaning against the wall. There was blood on her mouth. The woman was still speaking, pointing, blaming. She was the factory supervisor, and her name was Miss Lorna. I had seen her before. She was tall, sharp-eyed, and cold. I had always felt that something was wrong with her. My mother looked at me and shook her head, trying to stop me from getting involved. But I was already there. I asked what had happened. Miss Lorna said my mother had stolen money from the staff room. My mother said nothing. She wiped her face and lowered her eyes. That silence hurt more than anything else. I said it was a lie. I told her my mother was not a thief. Miss Lorna laughed and told me to go home. She said children should stay out of factory business. But I could not stay quiet. I stepped between them, my fists closed, my heart beating too fast. Miss Lorna pushed me back, and I fell on the wet ground. My hand landed on a metal rod lying near the laundry door. I picked it up without thinking. I did not want to use it. I only wanted her to stop. She moved toward my mother again, and I raised the rod. I shouted, for her to leave us alone. She laughed again, but then I took one step forward. That was all it took. She turned and tried to grab the rod, and I pulled back. In that second, she slipped. She hit the edge of the wall with her shoulder and fell down, crying out in pain. I dropped the rod. My legs were shaking. My mother pulled me away, and we both ran home. I did not look back. Inside our room, My mother locked the door. Her lip was cut and her cheek was red. I asked her again and again what had happened, but she did not want to talk. She washed her face and sat on the bed without speaking. I sat on the floor, afraid of what might happen next. Later that night, there was a knock at the door. My mother did not open it. The person left a note on the ground. It said she was fired from the factory. No explanation, no reason. I could see how tired she was, but she held the paper in her hand like it was something heavy. The next morning, she went to the market to ask for cleaning work. I stayed home and cleaned the room. I could not focus on anything. My stomach felt tight all day. In the evening, she returned with a small bag of rice and some tea leaves. She had not found work, but she smiled and said we still had food. That smile broke my heart. I knew she was trying to stay strong for me, but I could see the fear behind her eyes. For the next few days, we lived on what we had. I continued going to school, but I stopped eating lunch so we could save more. My mother walked for hours every day, asking in shops, restaurants, and buildings if they needed someone to clean. Nobody said yes. One afternoon, while I was walking back from school, a woman I did not know stopped me. She asked if I was the daughter of the woman who worked at the factory. I said yes. She gave me a paper with an address and said someone there could help. I showed the paper to my mother. She did not want to go, but I told her we had nothing to lose. The next morning, we went to the address. It was a small office in a quiet street. Inside, a man and woman listened to my mother's story. She told them everything: how she was blamed, how she lost her job, how she had worked for years without complaints. They told her about a legal aid group that helped women like her. They said they would try to speak to the factory and get her some support. We left the office feeling lighter, though we did not know what would come next. A week later, we received a visit. A woman from the aid group brought us food and some money. She also brought news. The factory had agreed to give my mother a letter saying she was not responsible for the missing money. She would not get her job back, but she could now apply elsewhere without shame. A neighbor helped my mother find a part-time job cleaning a school. The pay was less, but the work was fair. She came home tired, but without fear. We started saving again, even if it was only a little. One night I asked her why she had stayed silent that day when she was hurt and blamed. She looked at me and said, "Because I knew you were watching, and I did not want fear to be the lesson you learned from me." Her words stayed with me. I understood then that my mother was not weak. She was the strongest person I had ever known. We still live in the same room. The roof still leaks, and the fan still makes noise. But now, there is something different between us. A quiet strength. A promise. She gave up everything to protect me. That day, I stood up to protect her, and I would do it again. My mother started waking up even earlier after she got the job at the school. She would leave the house before the sun came up and return only after dark. The money was low, but she never complained. She said, "We are moving forward now. slowly, but forward. I tried to believe her, but things were not as simple as before. At school, I began to feel different. I had always been a quiet student, but now I found it hard to focus. My thoughts were full of worry. I kept thinking about the woman in the black coat, the blood, the moment I held that metal rod in my hand. I was scared that someone would come to our door again. I was scared that what I did would come back to hurt us. One afternoon, I returned home and found my mother sitting outside our door. Her head was resting on her arms. When she looked up, her eyes were red. I dropped my bag and sat beside her. "What happened?" I asked. She gave me a slow smile, the kind that hides more than it shows. "Nothing bad," she said softly. "Just tired." But I could tell that something had happened. Inside the house, I saw the envelope on the table. It was from the aid group. I opened it while she was changing her clothes. There was a letter and a form. It said we had been offered a place in a temporary housing center. It was clean, safe, and free for 6 months. My mother had not told me about it before. When she came back to the room, I asked why she didn't tell me. She sat down beside me. "Because I was thinking," she said. "This place may be small, but it is ours. We know the neighbors, and you are close to your school. I didn't want to move again." "But this house isn't safe," I said. "The roof leaks. The people from the factory still walk past. You don't sleep well here." She was quiet for a long time. Then she nodded. "You're right." That weekend, we packed our few things and left. We didn't have much. 2 small bags, a cooking pot, and our old blankets. We walked to the new place. It was a simple building, but the walls were clean. The room was small, but it had a window that opened properly. It even had a working fan. The people there were kind. Other women had similar stories. Some had children, others were alone. Everyone had lost something. Everyone was trying to start again. For the first time in a long while, I saw my mother laugh. It was not the same laugh from before. It was smaller, softer, but it was real. I started helping in the center during the weekends. I helped serve food and read stories to younger children. It gave me purpose. It also helped me stop thinking about that night at the factory. I began to sleep better. My hands stopped shaking. One afternoon, I was walking home from school when I saw her. The woman in the black coat. She was standing outside a shop, talking on her phone. I froze. My heart beat fast. I thought about turning and walking away, but something in me said no, not this time. I walked straight past her. I didn't look at her, and I didn't stop. But she saw me. I knew she did. Her voice dropped, and she turned her face away. That night, I told my mother. She was silent for a few seconds. Then she said, "She does not control our story anymore." That sentence stayed with me. A week later, we received another visit from the aid center. A teacher had heard about me and wanted to help. She offered to pay for my school books and gave me a place in a weekend class for English learners. It was free. I couldn't believe it. My mother held the teacher's hands and said thank you over and over again. I felt my eyes grow warm. For the first time in months, I felt something new. Hope. The weekend class became the best part of my week. I met new students, learned faster, and started writing again. I began to keep a journal. I wrote about the day we moved. I wrote about the factory. I wrote about my mother. One day, our teacher asked us to write a story that began with this line. I stood in front of her and didn't move. I knew exactly what to write. I wrote about the night I stood between my mother and the woman who hurt her. I wrote every detail, every feeling, every second. I cried while writing, but I didn't stop. When I finished, I showed it to my teacher. She read it quietly. When she looked up, her eyes were wet. "This is strong," she said. "You have a voice. You must keep writing." After that, something changed in me. I didn't just want to pass my exams. I wanted to tell stories. I wanted to write the truth. Back at the shelter, I started helping younger girls write too. We sat in a circle on the floor and shared our stories. Some were sad. Some were full of anger. Some had no words yet. But slowly, week by week, their voices grew louder. My mother watched us from the corner. She often sat with a cup of tea, listening. One evening she said, "Your words are stronger than anything I could give you." I held her hand. "You gave me everything." We still had problems. The school job was not always steady. The money was tight. Some nights we ate only rice with salt. But we had peace. We had safety. And we had each other. Then came the biggest surprise of all. A woman from the aid office visited again. She said a group of volunteers had read my story. They wanted to help. One of them offered my mother a full-time job cleaning offices in a nearby town. It came with a room, a small house with 2 windows, a real roof, and a door that locked properly. My mother cried again that day, but this time, the tears were not from pain. They were from relief. We moved 2 weeks later. The new house was quiet and clean. We painted the walls light blue. I had a desk for my books, and my mother had her own bed. We did not have pictures on the wall, but we had words. I wrote one sentence and taped it to the front door. It said, "This house stands because a mother never gave up." And every time we walked in, we remembered where we started and how far we had come. The new house was smaller than it looked in the photos, but to us, it felt like a castle. The windows opened without noise, the roof didn't leak, and there was space for 2 chairs on the porch. My mother started every morning with a small prayer beside the door. I watched her sometimes, just standing there, eyes closed, whispering words I couldn't always hear. She was different now. Not lighter or happier, but steadier. like a stone that had learned to survive the river. My new school was further away. I took a bus and walked 10 minutes through a quiet neighborhood. The children in my class were polite, but I didn't talk much. I still felt like a guest in someone else's story. I was waiting to feel normal again, but I didn't rush it. At home, I continued writing. I filled notebook after notebook. I wrote about our first house, about the day we left, about how it felt to be poor but proud. I wrote about the metal rod and the anger in my chest that night. I never forgot the way my mother looked at me afterwards, not scared, not angry, just deeply tired. Sometimes she read my pages. She didn't always say much. Once, after reading a few chapters, she looked up and said, "You remember everything, even the silence." That meant more to me than any grade. One Sunday, I saw her resting on the porch. Her hands were folded and her eyes were closed. She didn't hear me come outside. I asked, "Are you asleep?" She opened one eye and smiled, just thinking. "About what?" She paused before answering. "About what it means to be safe." I sat beside her. "And what does it mean?" She looked out at the trees. "It means not hiding anymore, not worrying about what will happen if someone knocks on the door, not jumping at every loud sound." We were quiet after that. Later that week, something unexpected happened. My English teacher asked me to read one of my stories in front of the class. At first I said no. I didn't want people to know about my life. I didn't want their pity. But she said, "People need to hear this, Rosa. You have power in your voice." So I stood in front of the class and read. My hands were shaking. My voice broke once or twice, but I didn't stop. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then someone clapped. Then another. Soon the whole class was clapping. Not out of kindness, but respect. One girl came to me after class and said, "Your story sounds like my mother's." That was the moment I understood something. My pain wasn't just mine. Other people carried it too. From that day, I started speaking more. I helped others write their own stories. I joined a group for young girls who had been through hard times. We met once a week at the library. We shared, we listened, and we supported each other. No one had to explain everything. Sometimes just being in the room was enough. One evening, I came home and found my mother sitting with a letter in her hand. She looked surprised. I asked what it was. She handed it to me. It was from the education center. They had accepted her for a part-time learning course for adults. She had always wanted to study again, but life had never given her the chance. Now it had. She looked at me with eyes full of emotion. "Do you think I can still learn?" I hugged her. "You already taught me more than any school." She started classes the next week. It was hard at first. She worked mornings and studied in the evenings. She was tired all the time, but she never gave up. I helped her with homework. She helped me with life. We made a strong team. Months passed. Our house started to feel less new and more like home. We painted the kitchen wall yellow. We hung up a small shelf for my books. My mother started keeping a notebook of her own. She didn't call it a journal. She just said, "These are my thoughts." One night she showed me a page. It said, "The world tried to break us, but we bent and did not fall." I cried when I read that. Time moved forward. We had good days and bad ones. Some weeks, money was tight. Some nights, she had headaches from work and study. But we were no longer afraid. We no longer waited for someone to come and take everything from us. We had control. Even if life was still hard, we owned our story now. Then, something happened that I will never forget. Our story, the one I wrote in class, was shared online by my teacher. A local news group saw it and contacted us. They wanted to do a short piece about my writing and my mother's journey. At first, we said no. We were not looking for attention. But then my mother said, "Maybe our story can help someone else." So we agreed. They came to our home with a small camera. They asked questions. I told them everything, not to gain sympathy, but to show strength. My mother spoke quietly but clearly. She told the truth. A few days after the story was posted, something incredible happened. A woman came to visit us. She worked with a community group that supported education for girls. She had read our story. She said she wanted to offer me a scholarship to study writing and literature. I couldn't speak. My mother held my hand tightly. I could feel her shaking. The woman smiled and said, "Your words have power. We want to help you use them." I said yes. Of course I said yes. That night, my mother and I sat outside under the stars. We didn't say much. We just held hands. Finally, she whispered, "You turned our pain into something beautiful." I looked at her and said, "I only followed your example." Today, I still live with my mother. She finished her learning course and now helps other women apply for education. I write stories, real ones, hard ones, brave ones. Stories like ours. Stories like hers. We don't forget where we came from. We don't forget the night with the metal rod, the blood, the fear. But now, we are more than that. We are not just survivors. We are builders, dreamers, voices. And every time I sit to write, I begin with her, because she is the reason I believe in strength, in truth, and in the power of love. Thank you for listening.